If it's a true number, 100,000 dead soldiers in 10 months must mean, by a rubric that I've heard you express before, 200 to 300,000 wounded and maimed soldiers, making the best part of 500,000 casualties in 10 months of a war that we keep getting told Ukraine is winning. Your comments, please.
Well, first of all, let's talk about the numbers that the distinguished head of the European Commission put out there. I think that they are wrong numbers. I think they're low. I think they're numbers that are reflective of the official dialogue that takes place between the Ukrainian government and their European, NATO, and American allies. But we have to remember that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt nations on the planet. There's a petition that has been signed by Ukrainian wives and mothers that are asking for the status of upwards of 320,000 men. They want to know where they've gone, what's happened to them, why aren't they writing home, why aren't they phoning home? These are missing. That's a lot larger number. And I think the wounded also are significantly larger. I think the Ukrainians are suppressing the truth of the losses. They're horrendous. I mean, 100,000 is mind-blowing, but I'm here to tell you right now, I think the number is probably closer to 250,000. And then you can extrapolate the wounded. And it's only going to get worse as this war unfolds, as Russian reinforcements arrive, as Russia begins significant offensive combat operations against a Ukrainian military that has been significantly degraded over the last couple of months. I use as a historical analogy the destruction of Army Group Center. That's the destruction of a German army group on the Soviet front in the summer of 1944. But we can also liken it to Operation Cobra, where the Americans and the British broke out of the Normandy bridgehead and drove the Germans back in pell-mell defeat. It was a slaughter of German troops on both sides, and I'm fearful for the Ukrainian people that we're going to see a similar slaughter of Ukrainian troops in the not-so-distant future.
Well, these numbers are, I was going to say Second World War type numbers, but actually they're closer to First World War casualty figures, aren't they?
Well, I mean, the Second World War had battles that produced significant losses, but you're right. We're looking at some battles right now that upwards of 1,000 men are dying a day, and that's World War I type numbers. And they're dying in trench warfare. They're dying under artillery bombardment. There are Ukrainian soldiers that are going to the front, thinking that they're going to close with and engage the Russian enemy in close combat, and they spend their entire tour under artillery fire, never once seeing the Russians, and seeing upwards of 60 to 70% of their unit killed or wounded before they're eventually withdrawn, totally demoralized, in an effort to regroup. And that's World War I type combat.
Of all people this week said that one of the least predicted outcomes of the war so far is that the Russians have demilitarized NATO by forcing them to expend almost all of the weapons inventory that they had. What are the Ukrainians doing with these weapons?
They're dying. They're receiving these weapons. They go into combat, and these weapons get destroyed. The men manning the weapons get killed. In the case of the artillery pieces, the Ukrainians fire off as many rounds as they can. And during the Gulf War, the United States military, this is 1991, we fired 60,000 rounds of artillery for the entire conflict. The Ukrainian military is firing upwards of 20,000 rounds a day. When we provide them with NATO standard 155 millimeter artillery pieces like the M777, the M109, and others, they use this NATO standard ammunition. But NATO hasn't planned for expenditures of this rate. I mean, I don't know what NATO has been doing for the last 20 years, but they obviously haven't been planning for a large-scale ground conflict in Europe, despite articulating that Russia was somehow the threat worthy of the enlargement of NATO. The United States produces around 250,000 155 millimeter rounds per year. Much of that's used for training, and the rest of it's used to keep stocks up to date as they retire expired ammunition. When you provide the Ukrainians with, say, 250,000 rounds of ammunition, we might think that that's going to last several months. The reality is it lasts 2 weeks, and then the Ukrainians need more. And after a while, we don't have any more to give. There's some talk in the media that the British Army, which, by the way, I just want to make the following point. The World Cup is going on right now, and you have many stadiums that can seat 100, 110 plus thousand people. You could put the entire British Army in a soccer stadium and still have about 40,000 seats free. So the British Army, as small as it is, will run out of ammunition in 2 days in a large ground combat, 2 days. The American Army will probably run out of ammunition in 2 weeks. NATO, this is war-losing numbers, meaning that if NATO were ever to engage in a conflict with an enemy like Russia, and you run out of ammunition against an enemy that uses artillery to dominate the battlefield, it's game, set, match Moscow from the start. NATO was never able to fight Russia in its modern configuration, its post-Cold War configuration. NATO isn't organized, equipped, or trained to fight Russia, but now they don't have the logistics sustainability to do it even in a fantasy scenario. So what this is doing, I think this war is actually doing NATO a favor, because it's allowing NATO to understand that if it goes to war, it will lose. It will lose decisively. So maybe don't go to war. This is the thought that should be in the head of everybody who wears a uniform in NATO today, that we should tell our diplomats to stop talking about aggressive posturing towards Russia, because the last thing NATO wants, needs, or even can survive in is a meaningful conflict with Russia.